Welcome to another episode with your host, Robert E. Hansen, psychic medium, author, and public speaker.
The power of love. I'd like to share a beautiful story with you during this podcast that has to do with a love affair from many, many centuries ago in the country of Spain. This story begins way back during the 15th century when a Moorish king, a Spanish Moorish king, whose name was El Cid, C-I-D, El Cid. He is considered legendary for various reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. As a matter of fact, he was actually cast in a movie played by the great Charlton Heston many, many, many years ago. They did a movie about El Cid. Of course, it was modified for Hollywood and various other reasons. But the driving mechanism behind the story is really, really, really quite powerful. So I'd like to share it with you guys. Back in the ancient days, when I say ancient, I'm referring back to the Middle Ages, the 16th century, the 15th century, 17th century in many cases. There were rules that were in place for the high lords, the overlords that took over the properties, that were the ruling class, the elite class, that were not only connected to the kingdoms of the particular regions from which they came, but it also endeared itself to the nobles, their wives, their children, their families, the princes, the barons, the earls, the royals. That whole elite class existed throughout most of Europe, throughout really worldwide. Almost every culture has some variations of it. There is, not to my knowledge anyway, one single country in the world that has only one leader and no one else underneath that assists in the ruling of the country or the controls of the people. Everyone has some parties, some followers, some folks that absolutely agree with, nod with, even when they don't really internally agree, but they agree with the guys in power. They want to keep what they have. They don't want to be thrown in prison, or worse, they don't want to lose their value, their land, and so on and so on and so on. So in this particular story, this Moorish king, the Moors being a very, very powerful community of people, I don't think they any longer exist as the Moors. Over time, the conquest of the Crusades, the various wars, all of that interplayed, and the Moors, I don't believe, really exist by name or culture as it was back at one time. They were extremely powerful. They dominated a great part of the European, Northern African culture. Very, very powerful. In any case, this particular king, his name was El Cid. That was his nickname. And he had a reputation not only being for a tremendous warrior, but he was also known for his incredible strength. His physical acumen was extremely well known. Apparently he had the strength of what, history claims or legend claims, that he had the power and the strength of 6 men. He could do basically the tasks of 6 men. He could go into battle and toss guys all over the place. Thus his reputation was extremely well known and feared. One afternoon, El Cid is out and about, and he comes across a villager, one of his own soldiers, actually. The guy lived in a local village, but he was one of El Cid's soldiers, one of the men in his ranks. And this young soldier, this young warrior who had promised his loyalty, his allegiance to El Cid, was getting married. Now, at that time, getting married, and it was a very, very big thing, but it was also a big thing to the king, the governor, the royalty in charge. And the reason for that was they had, in effect, an ancient law which no longer exists. But at that time, it was called prima nocta. Prima nocta. Prima nocta means the first night. as an N-I-G-H-T, like nighttime, not as a knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, like a warrior with a sword and shield, right? Talking about the first evening. And in the first evening, according to Christian culture, pagan culture, not just Christian culture, but also in the pagan culture, one had to be married before one would engage in sexual involvement. It was just kind of the way it was. It was a religious thing. Everyone kind of followed it because they felt if they violated that, the repercussions in hell would be dramatic and they would fall out of God's favor for breaking the law. So it was pretty much a very, very strictly followed tradition, except for the royalty. And in this particular case, El Cid catches a glimpse at this young warrior's upcoming bride. Her marriage is determined to be happening within a few weeks, and El Cid develops a passion for her. He becomes romanticized with her. He wants to, quote, have her before her wedding day. So he places into order prima nocta, and he contacts this young soldier who worked for him and said, tap, tap on the front door. You understand who I am. You know the power that I have. You work for me. You're about to get married. I would like your new bride-to-be to come live with me in the castle over the weekend, and I will return her to you back after the weekend has passed. Now, of course, the young knight and his bride-to-be were tremendously nervous, very upset, and they understood that if they did not go along with his demands, they would be hell to pay, literally. The young warrior could have his head cut off, the woman could be raped, and then cast into darkness, hung for not cooperating. It would be a penalty and a punishment that neither one of them wanted to endure. So they spoke as a couple, and with great heartache and great regret and great sorrow, they surrendered to the will of El Cid, and they granted her the opportunity to stay in his castle over the weekend and be returned on Monday back to her husband-to-be, and they would consider it a sacred act in the eyes of God, and just kind of squash the energy, squash the emotions, and try to forget about it and move forward. Well, the story has a couple of twists and turns here. After the weekend of intimacy, spending time together, when asked to go back to her husband, she declined. She actually shifted into realizing the great power she would have as becoming El Cid's queen. So the attraction to him not only grew from his prowess in the privacy of his bedroom, but also the fact that if she were to marry him or stay connected to him, the possibility of becoming the queen to El Cid was extremely attractive to her on many levels. She would live in the castle, she would have servants, she would have unlimited power, she would have unlimited money, and she would basically lay each evening with the man who she was beginning to fall in love with, because coming out of the rural, working class, farming, warrior class people, they lived in small apartments, small houses, thatched roofs. They worked as a working class person, kind of a blue collar, and they never had exposure to the castles and the king and all of the wealth and all of the riches that go with it. But this young woman received that option. So they notified her husband-to-be, listen, I care about you. I thought I loved you, but I don't love you the way I'm falling in love with El Cid. And she turns around and winds up staying there. And they authentically, El Cid and this woman, authentically developed a unique bond of love, and eventually wandered into the arms of matrimony, where they did in fact become husband and wife. And the warrior person eventually moved on, or her ex-husband, let's call him, moved on, and from what the legend says, eventually just disappeared and was really never heard from again. What happened to him and if he ever got married again or whatever, I have no knowledge of it, nor was it shared in the work that I've investigated. So as time moves on, El Cid, of course, is a warrior king. He's not a peacetime king. He's one of the great Moorish kings, and he has armies and legions of guys under his service, and they are entering a war with other tribes and other tribal communities. And being a great king, a great leader, El Cid would always mount his horse first. He would call his troops to his side. They were ferociously loyal to this great warrior, almost a Superman in the eyes of these other warriors in his community. They considered him almost a deity. And when he'd say, we're going to war, not only did they unfurl their banners and sharpen their swords and their axes, but they were more than willing to go to battle with him. So El Cid's in a battle, and as it turns out, in this one particular exchange, a spear has been driven into his chest. And this spear broke off, and the piece of the spear tip remained impaled in his chest. Part of the shaft, part of the stick that formed the spear had broken off, but a big piece of this spear was impaled in his chest in a very, very painful way. Not life-threatening per se, but extremely very serious and very, very dangerous. So they carry El Cid back to the castle on a stretcher, and he's brought into his private quarters, and there's the medical people, the alchemy people, the healers have gathered, and his knights in waiting are always there. His bodyguards basically are in the hallways, and excuse me, they're pacing around because this is their warrior king. This is their superstar, and should he fall into death as a result of this wound, many of them would lose hope, and their whole Superman would be gone. So the alchemy guys, the medical guys, the healer guys come in, and again, going back now, this is 15th century, give or take, and they say, listen, we have to pull this spear tip out, otherwise his infection is going to get really bad, and he's probably going to die as a result of this spear wound and the infection that is born with this wound. So, okay, they lay him down on a bed, and they are about to withdraw this spearhead, and once they pull out the spearhead, they then have to cauterize this gaping hole using a red-hot branding iron, which would then cauterize and seal the wound, seal the vessels, and he would then go on the mend, hopefully from that point forward. The problem is that this process is extremely painful, and El Cid had four of his big, strong men come in on command, and one held each arm and each leg as the medical person, as the surgeon, the doctor, the alchemist. In some cases, they had these healers, herbal people, and they came in and they attempted to withdraw their spearhead from El Cid. Well, good luck. El Cid, not only was he angry that he was hurt, but he was really suffering, and like a wild beast, he just tossed these guys all over the place, flinging them up against the walls, flinging them against the door, throwing them to the floor itself, and just like a mad dog, just would not let anyone do it, despite the fact he knew that he needed to have it done. So now they're all scratching their heads saying, we can't hold him down. He's too strong. He's our king. He's telling us to stay the hell away from him. We don't know what to do, but if we don't help him, he's going to die. So finally, the word gets out to his queen. Remember the woman that was supposed to marry the warrior blue-collar guy, who has now been his queen for a while. She's actually married to him now. It's his wife. and she is notified about the challenges that El Cid is creating, the crazy chaos that he is creating while they are trying to help him. So she walks in, a little petite thing, and, kind of like an average female power, whatever that may be, average, and nowhere near a full-blown man's strength, that's for sure, especially not the strength of 4 men, right? And she walks in and says, don't worry about it, I'll handle him. So they look at her and they say to the queen, with respect, queen, he is going to throw you around this room like a feather. If he could toss 4 of us around, what gives you the idea that you're going to be able to do this? And she says, I can. And she goes over and she holds El Cid's hand. And she rubs his hair, looks in his eyes and says, you know how much I love you. Hold my hand and let's get this taken care of. And El Cid looks her in the eyes and holds her hand and doesn't break his gaze upon his wife's eyes. And during that period, the surgeons come over, pull out the spear tip, take a red-hot branding iron and drive it into his wound, searing his flesh, burning the wound into a cauterized state, stopping the bleeding, and saving El Cid's life. And while this was all going on, despite the terrible pain that he was suffering, he never flinched. And his wife looked up and she said to the other warriors in attendance, to the doctors, to the alchemists, to the healers, the power of love is what he needed. All the strength would not have held my husband down. He would have been very angry. But love is what he was looking for, and it was love I brought to him. And the power of love is stronger than all of you put together. And that story has been carried on for centuries in some healing circles. And this is why even today, when people are about to have surgery, when people are finishing their final days with cancer, when people are enduring great injury and time is limited and their wounds are horrific, it is always, always a more powerful healing agent when the presence of those they love are nearby, sitting at their bedside, welcoming them when they come home from the hospital, offering comfort, just a hand, just a kiss, just the presence of knowing that love is there can heal almost anything, if not everything. Not physically, that's for sure, but love itself can heal the soul if you simply allow love's presence to do its job. And I just wanted to make sure we shared the story with you guys because it's really a beautiful one. I speak to you about the power of love. I have it with my wife and my family. And hopefully you guys have it too. And despite any challenges I may have endured or any challenges you may have endured, always seek love first. It is there. I know some of you might say, oh, well, I have no one to love me. Just look outwardly, look inwardly, and the love of God, the love of your Creator, is always there for you, always present. But in the world of men and women, there is someone. Let them hold your hand and tell you it will be all right. That is the power and the strength of love. Thank you for joining me.